So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Carrie Bourne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and we have hosted the Fairhaven Lecture Series here at Fairhaven Senior Services since 1983. We've had hundreds and hundreds of lectures and thousands of people attend our lectures that are by our talented faculty members from across campus. The series was actually began in the political science department, so it's always nice to have our political science faculty join us for the series, and we have one of those political scientists here today. Dr. Lary Anderson is a professor of political science at UW-Whitewater. He earned his bachelor's degree from UW-Madison and both his master's and PhD from McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Dr. Anderson has been at UW-Whitewater since 2001. He teaches courses on American government and politics, state and local government, American legislative process, ethnic politics, and American interest group politics. Dr. Anderson grew up in Fort Atkinson. He has a wife, 3 kids, 3 cats, enjoys cooking and eating, and likes to travel back to Canada as often as he can. Please welcome Dr. Lary Anderson.
Thank you very much for welcoming me here. I'm very grateful for this. My first Fairhaven lecture was sometime within 20 years ago with Kaz being the MC. So thank you to Carrie for doing this. Appreciate it. Okay. I apologize. So my throat's a little sore. I'll do my very best to not speak too quickly and to speak loudly enough so everyone can hear me. Okay, so just please let me know if I need to speak more loudly. Anyway, so the subject matter of this lecture series is for this semester is sort of 21st century. Right, so looking back at the past couple of decades and looking forward to what we can expect to see in the rest of the 21st century. And my area of expertise is in independence movements. So these movements that we see around the world where a country would like to say, or a place would like to be its own country. Think Quebec, Scotland, Kurdistan in northern Iraq and elsewhere. And I'm going to sort of provide a little context for that movement toward independence, so a little history, a little context, and then also talk about some of the mechanics of it. And in particular, I'd like to emphasize the use of referendums. So the talk is independence movements in the 21st century, Scots, Kurds, Catalans, and beyond, because I do talk about beyond those groups. So political scientists like to talk about the state. Okay, the state is put differently, the country. So I don't mean the state of Wisconsin, but I mean the state in a more sociological sense, where we might say, well, I get this benefit from the state, or I have to give my money to the state. And that's really the way that the political scientists tend to use the word state. Now, the state isn't really a natural being in the world. The state was purposely created. We might say nowadays the state is socially and politically constructed. Now, when we talk about state formation, so how did it come to be that we have this world of different states, so nation states or multinational states or things like that, so you go to the United Nations and you see I don't know how many countries it is anymore, but let's say 275 countries. There are 275 countries in the world and 275 seats in the United Nations. I'm not positive about that, and it doesn't really matter. But the point is let's look back a little bit at how the state came to be the norm in the international system. Now, so we talk about maybe 3 waves of state formation. There are different ways of doing it, of course. Political science is divided along all sorts of different interpretations and methods and things like that, but this is as good as any, I think. There's the gradual process in Europe. the gradual process in Europe whereby sort of boundaries were established, leadership was given, and you had Europe, turning into a whole bunch of different states right next to each other that often fought wars with each other, formed alliances with each other, and things like that. And we might point back to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1638 as sort of the beginning of the modern state system, and beginning again in Europe. Now, and then that sort of model that they created moved to the rest of the world. The norm was you will be a state, and your state, your country, will have territory and government, and you'll have representation, let's say, in the United Nations or something like that. You'll have a place on the world stage in which to act. That was the first, sort of wave of state formation. Then came decolonization. And decolonization was when sort of the European states that had colonized Africa and Asia and South America and so on were basically made to leave, and what they left, so what the European powers left behind was what had been a colonial apparatus that is now a state. Right? It's a country. So Africa and Asia, during that period of decolonization, saw lots of new countries being created. That was, again, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, up until the middle, even late 20th century. Now, in a sense, that whole sort of decolonization and state formation in Europe has worked itself out, and now we're dealing with a new wave of state formation, and that's where these countries that exist everywhere, there's a little piece of it that says, you know what, we don't really fit here. We fit maybe somewhere else. We fit joining another country, or we fit as our own country, but we don't fit in the country that we are accepted as part of within the world, within the international system, within the world state system. So what we then can talk about are modern independence movements that involve secession from existing states. What is secession? Secession is when a piece of territory in an existing state breaks off in order to form its own state. Put differently, when a piece of territory in an existing country breaks off to form its own country. So again, think Quebec, for example, would like very much to be its own country. It hasn't accomplished this yet, but there are those in Quebec that would like that very much, to secede from Canada in order to become their own country, their own state, without having a power that's higher than them. The Canadian government that they might imagine tells them what to do. You have to do things that you might otherwise not want to do. So 3 waves of state formation, and secession is sort of the modern method by which states are formed. Just some examples here of where we've seen secession in the world. This is South Carolina. South Carolina seceded from the United States in December 20th, 1860. It was its own country for a while. It was a republic for a short time. Then it joined with all the other seceding southern states and formed the Confederate States of America. Right? That's an area of a state seceding in order to form a country for themselves because they thought being part of this existing country wasn't working out for them, right? So they did it. Now it didn't work out, of course. We know that South Carolina seceded, and then it was, it's Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Texas, let's see who else ended up seceding, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, and they formed a country for a time. They prosecuted a war pretty successfully for a time, but ultimately we know what happened. They lost, and they were pulled back into the American state, right? So they seceded for a while. They were a separate country for a while, but then they were brought back into a reconstructed American state. Let's see, Eritrea. Eritrea would be also under the category sort of decolonization. So Ethiopia becomes an independent state or country. The Eritrean part of Ethiopia says we don't really fit here, and they advocate for independence in a decades-long civil war, and they finally get it in about no, I'm going to get the details wrong, but they don't matter that much. But they get it in about 1990 through secession, right? So they secede, they take a little bit of Ethiopia away from Ethiopia, and they form Eritrea, right? So that's state formation through secession. There is, okay, now this might be a little obscure. For a short period of time in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a country called the United Arab Republic. Okay, and the United Arab Republic was a union of Egypt right there and Syria right there. And they were a single country for a while, and Syria didn't think they were getting everything out of it that they wanted to get out of it, and they seceded from the United Arab Republics. They said, we want to join, this is going to work out really well, and then when they looked at how dominant Egypt was and how subservient Syria was, they said, you know what, we're going to leave the United Arab Republic. It only lasted 2, 3, 4 years. It didn't last very long at all. So again, sort of reversion back to sovereign status through secession. Bosnia, okay, so what used to be Yugoslavia, right? So all these countries right here were, so Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Serbia. These all used to be part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of communism, following a very long civil war in Yugoslavia, ended up into these different states, right? So this is, again, state formation through secession. Okay, let's see. And, oh, okay, here's a good combination of decolonization and secession. So on the one hand, you had decolonization. So Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and others, I'm not an expert in this area of the world, are part of the British Mandate in the Asian subcontinent, right? So they're controlled by Britain. Britain leaves. Okay, Britain, they demand their independence. They're granted their independence. Britain leaves, and India, or the this big colonial holding, is divided up into India on the one hand and Pakistan on the other hand. Now, Pakistan, you probably remember, was East and West Pakistan for a time. Right? So from about Indian independence until about 1970, we had an East and West Pakistan, and this was West Pakistan right here, and this was Bangladesh was East Pakistan. And Bangladesh basically said, being part of Pakistan isn't working out for us. We probably should have been granted our own separate statehood when India and Pakistan got their own separate statehood, but we didn't. So now we're going to fight a war. We're going to fight a war of independence against Pakistan with India as an ally in order to become our own independent country. So again, this is state formation through secession, through, in this case, war and secession. Those two often go hand in hand, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons why states try to avoid secessionist pressures because of that threat of war that often exists. Then there's also unification. Okay, so sometimes we're talking about countries breaking apart. Other times we do talk about countries that have come together or come back together, where countries may have been unified in some meaningful way and then separated or partitioned, but are then brought back together. So here are a couple of examples of that. So Vietnam was for a time North and South Vietnam. It was partitioned along communist and capitalist or so lines. And then it reunified in the 1970s. So Vietnam became a single, right, one Vietnam. Let's see, Germany. Right, this is the classic example that we're all probably even more familiar with, where East and West Germany existed for a very long time. So the West was capitalist, the East was communist. The West was on the side of the United States. East was on the side of the Soviet Union, so Eastern Bloc, Western Bloc, and of course, no, what's happening? Okay, I pressed the wrong button. And then, of course, we remember that Berlin itself was divided between East and West, so you had sort of a little bit of that East-West division within Berlin itself. So unification, right? And then here's another example of unification that has not happened yet, but might one day happen. and that's Korea, right? This is Korea, North Korea, South Korea. We're talking about a single people, single language, religion, not a single economy, maybe not a single culture anymore, and maybe even the language has changed a little bit between the time of partition and now, but we're still talking about a single people, right? But divided up into two countries. And I think it is a goal, ultimately, of the world community to see Korea unified at one point. So we would move from two states or two countries to one state or one country. Okay, and then the benefits of independence. Why would a country put themselves in that situation where they might be violently repressed by the existing nation? Why would they put themselves in the situation of putting themselves out there, in a sense, to say, we would like to be independent? So like, why would Eritrea do it? Why would South Carolina do it? Why would these countries put forward this idea that can be so deeply problematic in the world system more generally, but specifically within that specific country you are seeking independence from? There are significant benefits in this international system of significant benefits of independence in this international system. So one, you obviously get to exercise self-determination. Self-determination is a very sort of squishy catch-all term, but basically it means self-governance. I get to govern myself, by myself, for myself, with myself, and nobody else is telling me what to do, or at least nobody else is telling me what to do that has any sort of claim on me, that exists on a higher plane of authority than I do. So you get to exercise self-determination. Countries have self-determination, and if you are simply part of a country, you don't necessarily have self-determination. You have something else. Maybe it's close, maybe not. You get to enjoy status on the world stage, the regional stage. So maybe you are or would be a world power. Maybe you would be a regional power. You would have embassies and consulates in different countries. You would have a seat at the United Nations. These things we can't consider them unmeaningful. They are very meaningful. They give you status. So maybe you are no longer a world power. Maybe you are no longer the largest economy in the world, but at the very least, you are still part of this community of states that gets together in the United Nations and in other multinational organizations and participates, has a say in what might be going on, for example. And then also you can create your own security. A lot of what drives a movement for independence is the lack of security. This country that's supposed to be, the larger state, that's supposed to be protecting us, isn't providing that protection. Not only is it not providing that protection, it might be harming us, right? Saying, you can't speak your language, we're going to put your leaders in jail, if there are places in the world where you will be jailed, you will be tortured. People that speak the language that you want to protect will be jailed for speaking that language, forbidden from doing so. You'll be punished in school if you try to speak a language other than sort of the officially sanctioned language. So you can, if you are independent, you can create your own security. You don't have to look somewhere else for it. You can create it for yourself. Now, of course, the world can be a very dangerous place, but countries, in a sense, are really well equipped to deal with this world. Countries, almost every country has an army, right? Countries that have borders with other countries that aren't friendly to it, those borders are fortified. So you can create your own security if you are independent in a way that you cannot if you are part of an existing state that maybe you don't get along with all that particularly well. This is probably the slide with the most words. How to achieve independence in the international community? There's no single answer, but there are recently some very good sort of paths that one can follow in order to achieve that independence. Now, a couple of caveats or warnings. That we are talking about is actually a norm that exists in international law. Everyone here there, everywhere, has a right to self-determination. So that's the good news. If you are a country that's thinking, maybe I should become an independent country, the good news is the international system is at least partly on your side. So it's an important norm in international law. It's a guiding principle of international organizations, international law, international systems, peoples, plural, so people, so all of us, people and peoples, get to enjoy self-determination. Now here's the bad news then, if you are seeking, considering pursuing independence in your own little corner of the world. Bad news, couple of things. One, nearly every country in the world is vulnerable to secessionist pressures. If we let one group achieve it somewhere else, over there, let's say, so we recognize the secessionist aspirations of some country over there, why shouldn't the group close by achieve it? So why shouldn't, Hawaii achieve independence, for example, or California achieve independence, for example, if they wanted it, or Texas. I suppose it's more Texas than California at this point, but I think that might change as time goes on. So if we're going to accept secession and self-determination there, then why can't we accept it here? And this gets to sort of the norm of maintenance of territorial integrity, and that is to say that states, the international system, and the states within it really prefer to maintain the existing territoriality of the states that are out there. Right? So no new states, no new borders. Let's work within the system that we have in order to achieve self-determination, right? And that gets to that second point on the bad news. Self-determination might not require full independence, right? In order for you, me, we, them to be self-determining, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be an independent country, right? The exercise of democratic rights within an existing country might be enough. So that California, or Texas, or Alabama, or whatever, Wisconsin, is a self-governing state in the United States might be enough to fulfill that requirement or that expectation of self-determination. So independence might be a goal, but saying we need independence in order to exercise self-determination might not get you the benefit that you think it could or should, because the international system might come back and say, you are already self-determining by virtue of having a vote, by virtue of participating in the political system, by virtue of having this sort of regional or local identity like Wisconsinite or Californian or whatever. And again, so big tension in the world. Self-determination is a norm, right? And that points in one direction of maybe secession and independence, but territorial integrity is another norm that points in the direction of no more secession, no more new independent countries, right? So the fear is, the thing to avoid is infinite secession, where every little nook and cranny of a country declares its independence. And I can provide examples of these sorts of things, but imagine that, instead of we just declared all of our independence, so each one of us individually said, well, no, I'm a separate country, and just you try to govern me because I'm self-governing, I'm engaging in self-determination, and I'm going to do my own thing, and you don't have anything to say about what I'm doing with my life and body and property and things like that. Right, so how to achieve independence in the international community? It's going to be problematic, okay? That's the first thing. Despite this, the system, the world system, the international system, is full of secessionist pressures. Every continent but Antarctica and most countries have secessionist pressures. So, yes, Canada, United States, Mexico, many countries of South America, most countries of Europe, most countries of Africa, most countries of Asia, even Australia has secessionist pressures built into it, at least in the past, maybe not in the present era, though I'm not quite sure about that. So every country has secessionist pressures, despite the difficulty associated with secession and independence.
every continent, right? So what we might do then is we might look at the internal and external components of a successful movement for independence. So what do you have to do in order to make it happen? Let's see what the next slide says. The next slide says internal components, okay? Things like a border. A given border really helps. So case in point, we know the borders of Wisconsin, right? We know the borders of all the 50 states of the United States. It doesn't always make sense, but these borders are known. That helps, okay? When there is a border dispute, where does your area begin and my area end? That's when you add to the problem that's already there of achieving independence, you add another problem of figuring out where the border is, right? So that's a recipe for failure right there. So knowing where the borders are is a big help. Leadership. You need leadership. You need people saying that this is the plan we need to follow, that we need to pursue secession as opposed to other remedies that we might want to pursue or be able to pursue to deal with this problem that we're having with the existing country. And this then gets at the last and big thing, which is grievance, right? This is the big one. So grievance is the thing that animates the desire to change the status quo, okay? So I have a complaint. And my complaint is it's not working out well in the country. Sorry, we might have a complaint. It's not working out well in the country that I'm part of. Okay, fine. So what's the complaint? Well, we think we could do better outside this country. It doesn't work all that well. Well, we're being, genocide is being committed on us by the country that we're part of. Well, now the international community really says you guys have a good claim, perhaps, to pursue independence or pursue secession because you can't be self-determining if you have a country committing genocide against you or committing war atrocities against you or imprisoning you simply for being who you are. The notion that you maybe be able to do a little bit better, not very convincing to the population generally, not very convincing to the international community, but the notion that your group, like its literal survival, depends upon achieving independence and that self-determination. That's the sort of thing that really gets the international community. It makes their ears perk up and they pay attention and they're saying, okay, we're willing to consider the possibility that in this instance, because survival is at stake, we might be willing to agree to and recognize secession and the new independence of this country. So external, right? So you need to fight. So the external constraints are you need to fight against the norm of territorial integrity, and you need to establish legitimacy. You need to demonstrate to the world that your movement for secession is legitimate, right? So you made your argument about grievance. You've established your borders. You have a leadership that is adept at successfully pursuing desired goals, okay? But how do you establish that legitimacy in the eyes of the world, okay? And this is in a sense the question, and this is the crux, part of the crux of what I want to say, right? Often, groups use a referendum, right? So they'll hold a vote and ask the question: should we be an independent country, right? And a clear majority on a clear question is one of the best ways to achieve that legitimacy in the modern world for your movement, okay? Referendums are a form of direct democracy, right? We might be familiar with direct democracy, and not so much in Wisconsin, though we have a little bit of direct democracy in Wisconsin, but we might, point to states westward, for example, so California and Oregon, Washington, where they have a great deal of direct democracy in their systems, where a voter in California is expected not just to say no the candidates and the parties, but they're also expected to read ballot measures, and not just one ballot measure after ballot measure after ballot measure, and we're talking about dozens and dozens of pages, if not dozens and dozens of ballot measures that these voters have to contend with, right? But this is the requirement of a direct democracy, is that citizens are informed, and so they have to be willing and able to do the work in order to pass an intelligent vote on these laws. Anyway, so why referendums? Democratic forms help legitimacy. If you want to show to the world that you're going to do a better job running this place than that country over there, establishing democratic legitimacy is a key thing that you can do, and you can do that through a referendum. We're familiar with the tool, right? So school district referendums, I don't know if there's another one coming up, but there was one in 2018. It passed here in Whitewater. Advisory referendums, I don't know, there's been dark store referendums on the ballot here and there, marijuana referendums on the ballot here and there, Citizens United referendums on the ballot here and there in Wisconsin. And they don't have any practical impact, but they gauge the opinion of the population, right? So what do you think about dark stores? What do you think about Citizens United? What do you think about marijuana legalization and things like that? All right, and then, of course, in Wisconsin, we use a popular referendum, to ratify constitutional amendments, right? That is the last step in the process. Once you see that on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, you know that the people can ratify it, that is vote yes, or they can reject it, that is vote no. And if that amendment is going to be, you vote no, it's not going to be part of the Constitution unless it goes through the process again. Yeah, so we're familiar with this tool, right? It makes sense to us. Of course, that is a way to establish legitimacy. So let's see how it's been used. So independence movements in the modern era, Quebec has always been nationalist, so this is the province of Quebec in Canada, but in the 1960s it became separatist, supporting separation and independence from Canada. It has the required components, right? So it has borders. It has a leadership, a political party, more specifically, that desires secession from Canada, and it has a grievance. Now, the problem with the grievance is that Quebec wasn't always treated well in Confederation, right? The French speakers weren't always treated well. They were treated as second-class citizens. They weren't, they didn't have the best jobs available to them within Canada, but there was never genocide. There was never jailing leaders. There was never some really profound injustice. There was just like little sort of, little injustices here and there that led up to sort of Quebec saying, you know what, we can do this better on our own. And that's really their primary grievance, is that we can govern Quebec better on our own rather than in Canada. Now there's Quebec. Right, so that's the province of Quebec. You can see right there, pretty big. And Quebec's question, so Quebec has actually had 2 referendums on independence. Their questions have always been rather wordy. So there's one. Okay, so we got the English and the French. And this is the first independence referendum in May 20th, 1980. I'm going to go to the next slide that has the English version, hopefully in bigger letters. But that's the question. The government of Quebec has made its proposal to negotiate a new agreement. You know what? I'm not going to read that whole thing. It's long, and it's not really asking a simple question. Should Quebec be independent? Yes or no? It's saying we've made this deal, and we're considering this possibility, and should we move forward on it? Not surprisingly, the no wins. Very clearly, this is in 1980, right? So we're talking before the 21st century, but these methods have been used into the 21st century. So the result, no wins, 60-40. The aftermath is conciliation. The federal government says, oh, come on, Quebec, we can figure out a way to live together and be happy. Unfortunately, Canada's constitution is patriated, brought back to Canada, or rather brought to Canada from the UK. So Canada's constitution was for a long time simply an act of British Parliament. And what they did was, after this failure on the part of Quebec to secede from Canada, they brought the constitution home from the UK to Canada. But they did it without Quebec's support. Quebec did not like this. This set the stage for a second referendum, the 1995 referendum, so 15 years later. So Quebec, what are they doing? They're continued dissatisfaction with Confederation. The separatist Parti Québécois regains power, and they hold another referendum. Again, the question is too long. It's not as long as the last one, though, at least. But so there's the English side. Let me just show you. So, do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign after having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership within the scope of the bill respecting the future of Quebec and of the agreement signed on June 12, 1995? Again, it's a confusing question. It's not clear. The requirements in the international community are clear question, clear majority. Even if Quebec had a majority, the absence of a clear question would have been problematic from the standpoint of the international community. What happened in this one? It's a squeaker. So October 30th, 1995, the no wins. So this is only in Quebec that this election is held, or this referendum is held. The no's win 50.6% to 49.4%. So it was a razor-thin margin in favor of Quebec's continued membership in Canada. Aftermath is more promises. The federal government makes more promises, renewed federation, stuff like that. Clarity Bill is passed in order to really specify within Canadian law what steps need to be taken if you are going to try to negotiate independence with Canada. Questions remain, though. So there hasn't been another referendum since 1995. The separatist Parti Québécois has been in power here and there since that point in time. But people, in a sense, are moving on to other things. It's not like independence is gone, but it might be, let's say, asleep right now. The economy has been doing well in Canada, and so people don't necessarily want to they don't want to rock the boat economically on the off chance that maybe they would have it better after independence. South Sudan. So borders, leadership, grievance. There's a border there. There's a leadership there, and there is a grievance. And this is one of those episodes of literal survival. South Sudan had been fighting a war with North Sudan. There were differences, national differences, religious differences, racial differences, ethnic differences, and so on. And there's South Sudan right there. I believe the most recent new country in the world. And indeed, they achieved their independence with a referendum. That's what the ballot looked like. So separation on the one hand, and unity on the other hand, right? So we're gonna secede from Sudan, that's the one, and we're going to stay within Sudan. Not surprisingly, given the circumstances on the ground, the result is an overwhelming majority in favor of independence, 98.8% in favor of independence. The aftermath, unfortunately, isn't great. So one thought, that after South Sudan achieves its independence, it would be in a better position. Instead, South Sudan falls into civil war shortly after independence. Scotland, borders, leadership, grievance, all of those things, right? So we know what Scotland is and where it is. We know there's a separatist leadership in Wisconsin, Scotland. And grievance. The grievance in Scotland is similar to the grievance in Quebec. It's not that Scotland is having genocide committed against it. No, not at all. And everybody knows this. But it is this notion that we've been lesser partners in this union. We could probably do it better on our own, especially with all that nice North Sea oil that we have just off the coast of Scotland. They have held there, so there's Scotland right there. And they have held their independence referendum. And you can see this is what an independence referendum should look like. Okay? Scotland's referendum, September 18th, 2014. There's the question, should Scotland be an independent country? Yes, no. And that's your ballot, and you check the yes, you check the no. The result in this instance was pretty decisive no victory, so no wins, 55.3 to 44.7%. The aftermath is there's a promise of more devolution, that is giving more power from the House of Commons in London to the Scottish Assembly, the Scottish people, or the Scottish Parliament, rather. Wales has an assembly, Scotland has a parliament. But what comes after the Scottish referendum is Brexit, and as a result of Brexit, a second referendum is being planned in Scotland. And I'll explain this in a second, or I'll show you a visual of it, but the basic explanation is that Scotland didn't want to leave, right? Brexit happened, so the UK is out of the European Union. Scotland did not want to leave, and they were compelled to do so because they're part of this union that they are maybe not convinced is working out well for them anymore. The Kurds. So this is one of the promised discussion points. The Kurds. So we're talking specifically about the Kurdish region of Iraq. Okay. There are Kurds elsewhere in the world. So think Turkey, for example. Think Syria. But the Kurdish region of Iraq held an independence referendum not that long ago. And they have borders, leadership, grievance, and part of the grievance was indeed that under Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, they were indeed targeted for genocide. Their lives were at risk simply for being Kurdish. One of the problems, so I glossed over borders, is that there is no accepted border for the Kurdish region of Iraq, right? It's in flux. There are oil fields there, and when you have oil fields, you have people disputing, saying, well, those are our oil fields, and you have the other side saying, no, those are our oil fields. And so there's the Kurdish, so there's Iraq, and the Kurdish region is up in the north of Iraq, and then you have Kurds elsewhere around the world in there, but we're only talking about Iraq right now, and that referendum in Kurdistan, Iraq, with ballot in Kurdish, Arabic, Turkish, and Assyrian. So Kurdish, Arabic, Turkish, and Assyrian. Basically ask the question, do you want the Kurdistan region and the Kurdistani areas outside the region to become an independent state? And you got to mark your ballot, and if you say yes, you mark that one, that's the Kurdish flag, and if you say no, you mark that one, that's the Iraqi flag. And what happened? Overwhelming yes, 92.7% to 7.3%. Here's the problem. There was confusion about whether this referendum was supposed to be binding. So was it an advisory referendum? Was it a binding referendum? Did the Kurdish regional government have the authority to issue a binding referendum on the question? And it seemed like there was confusion, and it also seemed like, so despite the overwhelming yes, it was portrayed initially as non-binding, then as binding, and it's very clear that neither Iraq nor the neighboring countries would allow this. Turkey especially does not want the Kurds of Iraq to be independent because they have their own quote-unquote Kurdish problem, and if the Kurds of Iraq become independent, perhaps the Kurds of Turkey will seek independence also. In fact, they are, and that would be a problem for Turkey. Catalonia. Borders, leadership, grievance. All of these things, again, the grievance, though, is not genocide. It is simply, I think we can do better outside of Spain. And part of that is that Catalonia is a very, very developed part of Spain, the wealthiest part of Spain, perhaps. Lots of other parts of Spain are less poor, and Catalonia thinks that they've been subject to discriminatory redistribution. Basically, the government in Madrid takes money away from Catalonia and gives it to poorer Spaniards. Catalonia doesn't necessarily like this because they don't necessarily see themselves as part of the larger Spanish community because they want independence. So there's the Catalonian region right there, right in the border of France with Spain. There's the ballot from the referendum that took place in 2017, and it's in Catalonian, or Catalan, Spanish, and Occitan, so another minority language, basically asking the question, do you want Catalonia to become an independent state in the form of a republic? And they offered a resounding yes, 92% to 8%. So yes, please, we would like to be independent. Here's the problem. Voter turnout was very low. Yes, it was a majority of the voters, but no, it wasn't a majority of voters, right, that actually participated in the election. Now, a unilateral declaration of independence was declared. Catalonia said at one point during this process, we are now an independent country. And then they took it back. Now we're not really an independent country. We're working on it, though. So the UDI was declared, suspended, many separatist leaders were arrested, some of them are living in exile, and this is Spain, right? So it did not work out as perhaps the Catalonians had wanted it to work out. Generally speaking, countries and the international community do not like secession. So even a clear majority in favor of secession, let's imagine it had been, 80% turnout or 90% turnout, like the referendum in Quebec in 1995, 90% voter turnout. Would that have resulted in an independent Catalonia? Better chance, yes, but given the international system's caution about creating and accepting and recognizing new states, maybe not. So United Kingdom, Brexit, and I'm coming very quickly to an end here. There'll be time for questions, so give me about 4 more minutes. Borders, leadership, grievance, right? We all know this stuff. So the borders of the UK are set. Leadership, yes, there was a party in power that said, yep, we're going to hold a referendum on whether we want to be part of the European Union. And grievances, again, a little bit soft in terms of grievances, but it was something along the lines of we feel our ability to govern ourselves, to enjoy sovereignty is being put at risk. And the great thing is, from the standpoint of the British, is that unlike these other countries, the European Union actually has a process for withdrawal. Article 50, you invoke Article 50, you go through the process, you can leave the European Union. Most countries don't have this, and if they do, think Soviet Union, they don't really mean for it ever to be used. European Union is a little bit different in that regard. They didn't want it to be used, they weren't making it easy, but it happened. So there's the United Kingdom, right? And there is the question, again, simple, Quebec should take a lesson from this. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? Remain or leave, very simple. And the vote was a clear but narrow vote in favor of leave. Remain gets 48%, leave gets 52%. They invoke Article 50 of the EU Constitution, which is basically the process by which a country leaves the European Union. Aftermath, they're now on their 3rd prime minister after the Brexit vote because it didn't go exactly as they wanted. Cameron sponsored the referendum, did not want it to pass. May was going to shepherd through Brexit, couldn't. Johnson seems to finally have achieved it. So they're on their 3rd prime minister. Brexit finally accomplished, but perhaps, question mark, so long Scotland. Here's what I'm talking about. So we can look at the leave and remain vote. So remain is the yellow and leave is the blue. Scotland, right there, did not want to go. Right, so there's a question, and so they're out now, right? No matter what, they're out of the European Union for the time being. As an independent country, could they come back into the European Union? Perhaps, but that's for another referendum. So more to come? Yep, my suspicion is that we will see more of this. Why? It's a response to globalization, a response to resume or obtain sovereignty. The dynamic, I think, will indeed look a great deal like the Scotland-UK response to globalization. Scotland wants globalization. The UK says, you know what, I think we can do it on our own. I think we're going to see a lot more of that sort of thing. So you'll have the larger nations pulling back from the institutions of globalization. Smaller nations that are part of these larger nations will try to withdraw from the larger nation to join or rejoin the institutions of globalization. I imagine that one could see at some point in the future in the United States a similar situation with, say, the U.S. saying, we are withdrawing from these institutions of globalization, and a state saying, actually, we would prefer to remain in these institutions, so we'll leave the United States so we can go back into the international community. In my imagination, it's sort of the U.S. on the one hand and California on the other hand. So I think we'll see more referendums on this in the future. That's my suspicion. And are there any questions? And thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I did not know how long I was going to speak. A little bit too long, I apologize. Okay.
No, we still have time. We have time for questions. Any questions? I have a little awkward microphone I can come around with. It's okay. We'll make it work.
Okay.
Questions? Hello. Lots to take in today?
If anybody wants to see a map, you can let me know. I can put it up there.
Questions? Okay. Well, you can also ask your question to Dr. Anderson privately if you'd like.
Sure.
We'd rather do it that way.
No, I'm sick, so be careful. I'd stay away.
You can stay a little distance and ask
Yep.
your questions. I'll let you let that lecture soak in a little bit, and if you have questions, please come and talk to Dr. Anderson afterwards. Next Monday, we are going to be talking about a stormy start to the 21st century, some of the major storms and weather events with one of our faculty members from the Geology and Geography department. So I hope you join us on Monday. But today, why don't you go ahead and join me in thanking Dr. Lary Anderson for his talk today. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks very much.